When we imagine access to critical systems, we usually picture a massive, heavily guarded vault opening up for a VIP. But in high-stakes environments, access has nothing to do with status, rank, or how much a person is trusted. The true standard is functional necessity. We know this explicitly as the Need-to-Know Doctrine. The applications of this doctrine are universal. It dictates the flow of classified military intelligence, isolates corporate mergers, enforces interpersonal boundaries, and even architects human self-deception. Examining the architecture of this doctrine reveals the logic of institutional secrecy and identifies the specific structural flaws that lead to systemic failure. This chart shows how security operates on two entirely different orthogonal axes. The y-axis represents classification. It simply measures how inherently sensitive a piece of information is. The x-axis represents compartments. It determines a completely separate metric, whether an individual is permitted inside the specific room where the project lives. A high-ranking general who possesses the maximum y-axis clearance can be entirely excluded from a critical x-axis compartment, simply because they have no assigned role in it. Clearance is a prerequisite floor, not an all-access pass. Seniority implies zero automatic entitlement to the information held within a specific compartment. The first operational consequence of this doctrine is bounding the blast radius. If an individual in the network is compromised, the resulting damage is structurally contained to only their specific, isolated slice of the network. The second consequence is traceability. Small circles guarantee that a leak investigation begins with a short, exact list. The psychological deterrent of instantly knowing a leak came from one of 9 names is often more valuable than the data containment itself. Historically, these operational rules apply not just to facts, but to the provenance of those facts. In the Second World War, commanders were given decrypted facts, but fed fake cover stories about reconnaissance flights to hide how they were acquired. The intelligence itself was passed on, but the method of decryption was heavily compartmentalized away from the commanders using it. A method is structurally more sensitive than its resulting content. Content eventually expires, but a method is indefinitely reusable. In the corporate sector, mergers and acquisitions rely heavily on formal insider lists. This legal requirement creates a traceable compartment that allows regulators to investigate exactly who knew what during sudden share price movements. In information security, we automate this doctrine as the principle of least privilege, where users only receive the baseline access needed to function, and no more. In the scientific domain, clinical trial blinding is the exact same doctrine, applied internally by researchers. Researchers deliberately withhold specific trial allocations from themselves to completely prevent their inherent biases from contaminating the final observation. The doctrine operates independently of its domain. It functions solely as a mechanism to restrict data to preserve the integrity of a system. But the doctrine has a fatal trade-off. It sacrifices analytical capability in exchange for containment. This causes a specific, systemic breakdown known as synthesis failure. If everyone strictly holds only their justified fragment, no single entity possesses enough data to recognize the larger pattern. This precise mechanism was the central finding behind the most devastating intelligence failure in modern American history. Rigid internal silos prevented fragmented warning signs from being assembled into a cohesive threat profile. In the corporate world, this exact structure leads to fraud incubation. Compartmentalization doesn't inherently invent fraud itself, but it provides the exact structural darkness required for it to survive and grow. It was this systemic financial fragmentation that enabled the historic collapse of Enron. It enabled a massive medical collapse in Silicon Valley, where siloed engineering teams were explicitly barred from viewing the full device functionality. And it facilitated a European payment processing scandal, where auditors were structurally denied the fragments necessary to verify missing billions. A system engineered for perfect information security structurally guarantees that systemic rot will go undetected by the very people employed to find it. This operational blueprint maps directly downward into the messy realm of interpersonal relationships and cognitive self-blinding. Defensible self-compartmenting means intentionally imposing consumption limits on negative news to avoid paralysis, or sequencing large workloads so you only focus on the next step. But the illegitimate application of the doctrine is the interpersonal Kafka trap. The ethical boundary line is decision relevance. If withheld information would alter what another person consents to or plans around, it was never eligible for compartmentation. When the doctrine is applied to decision-relevant facts in a relationship, the phrase, "you didn't need to know," ceases to be security. It becomes a mechanism of unilateral control. This table provides the ultimate evaluative framework for assessing any information barrier. You must ask two distinctly separated questions. What is the harm if this leaks, and what is the cost if the right person is denied access? Institutional failure occurs when architects obsessively measure the harm of a leak, but ignore the catastrophic cost of the right person being denied access in time. Since total transparency and blind trust are both impossible, the only remedy is installing a cleared, accountable auditor directly inside the secure compartment. A system's integrity is never protected by the thickness of its walls. It is protected by the accountability of whoever sits inside the dark room.